committee and friends. Thank you for attending my DMA lecture presentation. Today, I'm going to talk and analyze a preeminent modern Chinese violin concerto composed by Chen Qigang. Chen Qigang is one of greatest, I would say, one of important living Chinese composers. So once we talk about current representative Chinese composers, especially for the audience of scholars overseas, most of them will be say Hanbin and Chen Yi. And yes, both of them have background of study in United States and be very active in the world stage. Also, once we refer the representative Chinese violin concerto, it must be the Butterfly Lover, but it's made in previous century. Unlike Hanbin and Chen Yi, composer Chen Qigang chose to study in France as one of students of Messiaen. This makes his music language and style, to some extent, different from his college. And his personal experience, the suffering, and introverted personality make him may not be known to the public. But even though the quality of the composition and the French flavor in his music reach the category of modern Chinese repertoire and set a standard for the following younger Chinese composers. So in this session, I will introduce one of his work, La Joie Souffrance, to provide not only insight into a valuable work of 21st century's violin concerto repertoire, but to get a glimpse into some of the musical influence of Chinese composers working in France. By extensions, I hope to shed a light on some of the factors that influenced the trend developments on Chinese composers in the early 21st centuries. So, beside the background information about Chen Qigang and his compositions, this dissertation mainly in two sections. First is a theoretical analysis, another is referred to the musicological aspect. So let's have a brief introduction about Chen Qigang first. So generally, the study background of Chen Qigang can be summarized in three stages. Firstly, he was nurtured in a good art-loving environment by his family. His father was the famous painter and calligrapher, and his mother was a musician. So influenced by his father and mother, Chen Qigang studied a calligrapher and painting, kunqu, and Peking opera since he was a child. And as Chen Qigang said one time before, the initial tune of La Joie de Souffrance comes from one of his favorite songs in his childhood. Later on, Chen Qigang played clarinet, and after graduating from the middle school, he served as orchestra player, conductor, composer in Beijing. And in 1977, he enrolled the composition department of Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing, followed Professor Luo Guanzhong, who was the one of famous educator and the composer in the previous century of China. Also was the teacher of Hanbin and Chen Yi. Okay, these two pictures to show the very important professor for Chen Qigang. The left one is Chen Qigang in white, his professor Luo Guanzhong with his family in France. The second one is to just taken from lesson from Messiaen. So, in the 1983, the third stage, Chen Qigang was selected to study abroad by the Ministry of Education after he won the first prize of national composition competitions. And during the 5-year study in France, he followed Messiaen for the further composition studies. So I think these 3 moments or 3 stages contribute to Chen Qigang's musical language. The good art environment by his family nurtured Chen's interest in the Chinese traditional music and art. And following the domestic study set a stone in the composition techniques for Chen Qigang's later French study. And the study with Messiaen improved and enriched his language in the musical compositions. So after his time in France, Chen Qigang's music career started to take off. By the end of the 20th century, Chen Qigang's work has been widely recognized and published. Even though the number of the performances is not abundant, but his work spectrum covered from solo to chamber music, symphonic music, and film music. The qualities are exquisite and elaborated. And here are the words by the domestic and the overseas music industry for Chen Qigang's inclusion in music. There are 2 prestigious awards. One was in 2004. He was hired as a composer in the residence to collaborate with Strawberry Philharmonic Orchestra. Another was serving as the music director for the opening ceremony of the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. Okay, let's move to Chen Qigang's musical language and the characters. There are a couple of labels in Chen Qigang and his musical language. The first is New Wave and the student of Messiaen and modern literarities. So for the first one, the New Wave. So generally, the modern Chinese international students are forced to play an important role in spreading Western civilization and promoting the social revolution in modern China. Either they do a lot of effort in development of Chinese music. Since they receive a systematic and comprehensive Western music composition education, the work they make should break the restriction of traditional form, content, and aesthetic concept that's used by the older generation of Chinese composers. These young composers are willing to combine the Chinese language with modern Western composition techniques and concept in their music. So by the mid of 1980s, music historians and musicologists refer this composer and lay work as New Wave. So the composer Chen Qigang and Tan Zhen Chen Yi, they are the member of the New Wave. Even though the work are not well known to the Chinese performers and largely unknown to the Western audience, they are worth of acknowledging to performers and the audience. Secondly, it's about the identity of the student of Messiaen. So actually, it's very shock news to the domestic music industry at that period. For one reason is the worldwide reputation on Olivia Messiaen. Another is most composition major students prefer to go to United States rather than other Western countries, so which makes sense because it's the main current at that period. And once Chen Qigang said in one interview, he admits the influence of Messiaen in his later composition, especially in the harmonic preference. So in his work, we can get a lot of French flavor in it. At the same time, he kept his essence in Chinese music. He really used folk sounds quite a lot, so there will be a very nice blend of Chinese music in a way of a lot of French flavor in his music. Thirdly, the modern literarities. So some domestic resources, the character of modern literati may be the best description of Chen Qigang. which involve four aspects in his personality and music characters. The personality like a gentleman, the lifestyle like a hermit, and top stand artist work as a spring-like way in the music inheritance. So the gentleman means his introversion in the personality, and the spring means his dedication to the traditional Chinese musical language. Okay, let's move to the larger dot forms. This composition is initiated to dedicate for the Beijing International Music Festival in 2013 and became the required piece for the second Shanghai Extern International Violin Competition. So around 2 years later, in 2016, Chen Zhigang finally to start thinking the piece, and it took 1 year to brew and 7 months to complete this 24 minutes hard work. The literary meaning of this title is like an inspiration from composer's life and reflection of the composer's own situations. But the motive of this composition that conveys quite complex and considerate, because in 2012, Chen Zhigang, 29 years old son, died in a car accident in Switzerland. According to the composer recollection, he cries every day at that time. And after experiencing the many gorgeous moments in life, and sadly suffered the pain of losing his son, this specific person's experience of joy and sadness, and the precipitant of emotion and thought, led him to put his thought of gain and lost in his music. This composition actually is based on the ancient Guqin music called Yangguan Sandie, which derived from a poem sent Yuan is a person name to Anxi is a place by Wang Wei, a poet in Tang Dynasty of China. And here's the translation of the poem. So, what got Wei Chen past that is the morning read. The villas near the hotel become green again. I urge you to empty another cup of wine. Western Yangguan Pass, you will see no friends like me. So this poem describes a very common parting sense in ancient China. It has no special background, but a deep fairway feelings. Therefore, this is very suitable for most fairway situations. The contrast between the sceneries and the inner world is a shining point of this poem. Seizing the description by the poem from the morning ring to the dusty road, from the green guest house, the hotel, to the emerald villa, it creates a fresh and bright picture. Every object be given a positive and hopeful characters, and especially for the last two phrases, I urge you to empty another cup of wine. You will see no more friend like me. So it's leaving an impression of hopeful but scenery wish to the friends. As mentioned before, the reason why Chen Zhigang chose these themes is not only this music is his favorite sounds when he's young, but also because it describes an eternal topic of life, the departing. The expectation for the unknown future and the sadness at the farewell. So Chen Zhigang once said, people are happy because they gain, and sad because they lost. But everything is composed of gain and loss for keeping the balance. The sadness and joy are just like the way of gain and lost. The gain is lost, and the loss is the gain. The gain of the gain and lost, sadness and joy are all the moments of life. Everything that gained will remain in the end, and what is left for us is nothing. So we listen the original music for this moment. compositions, composers want to express not only a simple feeling through this work, but also express an inseparable trains of sadness, of joys. Through the joy and compassions, all the feeling will be sublimated into the unity of the great love in the world. Since the decision considered its composition as a fusion of musical language, so as a concrete way of showing Chen Zhigang's particular approach to fusion, the analytic section will fulfill three purposes. Firstly, it introduced the techniques as Chen Zhigang employed in the larger data forms, such as the Chinese pentatonic system, the alley notes, chord, and the orchestration techniques, which also associate with Messiaen. Secondly, I will show how these modern techniques are integrated with Chinese musical language. And third, I offer exploration the way of how the theme be shown by the music. Also, in the analysis sections, I will select some representative passage or excerpt to illustrate my point, which its content will be divided in two parts, harmony and form. The harmony aspect will be involved three areas: the chords, the note arrangement, and the key design, also the orchestration preference. Here we start our analytic sections. As the small music elements, but widely spread in the composition, the chord played a very important role in shaping the musical language. So before moving the analytics part, it's necessary to have a brief introduction about basic knowledge of Chinese pentatonic systems. The basic Chinese pentatonic scale contains 5 notes called Gong, Shang, Jue, Zhi, Yu, similar to the D, E, F sharp, and B in the D major scale by the Western theory systems. The most important interval is the unique major third between the Gong and Jue, like D and F sharp. Since it can be used to define the key of the pentatonic scale. And another two subordinate intervals are the perfect fourths between the Shang and Zhi, like the E and A, and the Jue and the Yu, means the F sharp and B. Also, there's a note called main note, which is the most stable central note of scale, but not related to the key definitions, so which judged by the last note of the phrase in the multiple situations. Also, like the Western modulation system, Chinese pentatonic system also have the modulation feature by adding extra notes at the interval, like the minus major second notes in the scale. It became more possibility and more convenience for the modulation. In the following, I will introduce two typical examples for showing the chord design. The first one is the color chord for building attention of feelings, which I will illustrate later. The second chord is the very traditional chord for the harmonic support for the main melody. Okay, listen to the chord from two excerpt by the piano part. here is the second excerpt for the chord design. So in the presentations, I will use the measure 24 from the left examples in my illustrations. So in the left side, the cello section marked by the purple brackets has a very lyrical ascending line, where the harmonics are formed when the piano is entered in measure 23. From the acoustic perspective, the chord creates a tension and noise effect compared with the cello sections. Yeah, the registration of the chord is space cover a wide range and in static characters, which letting us know the chords should be with some specific function or purpose. And then after further analysis, I realized that these chords are designed deliberately and have some specific inner relationships. So let's look closer to this chord. In measure 21 to 25, the chord, which marked in the blue color, is based on the D pentatonic system, which is the tension of previous melodies, just the cello, the piano played before, in the red mark. Unlike the traditional concept of scale in Chinese music, Chenjigang used a linear pentatonic component to build the chord. That is, the scale is used vertically rather than horizontally. So it's not common sense in the Chinese traditional composition before. In addition, the chord itself has three components. The first is the Western music, in the Western music of the common practice period. The chord in the bass clef suggests have a D tonal center because it has a form interval like the perfect fifth between D and A in the lower register. Secondly, in the treble clef area, the component pitch of the chord in the blue bracket almost come from the Chinese D pentatonic scale, like D, E, F sharp, and A and B. Third, there's one unusual added note in this chord. It's the C sharp, the very last note, the C sharp, which the note does not exist in the traditional Chinese pentatonic system, but we can be understood a leading tune of the D major diatonic scale. And here's the graphic for this design. Also, I find extra excerpt from an art song by Messiaens, which also referred to similar adding note techniques. Yeah, Messiaens add an augmented force on the A major chord in the major 11, and add a 6, the G sharp, to the B dominant 7 chord in the major 13. From the perspective of Messiaens, the added notes play a vital role in reaching the acoustic effort on the existing chord. But more importantly, they can coexist with the chord and bring a live sense, emotion to the existing chord, giving the composer resolve of expressing the inner feeling and the music. Like his professor, Chenjigang's scale and the harmonic structure also designed to blur the boundary between Chinese and Western music by adding the leading note, just the C sharp before. The extra notes can weaken the acoustic effect of the Chinese pentatonics, but the leading tone means a very linear line and leading to the resolve. Since this design of chord structure would play such this chord structure would be a symbolic trait of combining the Chinese and the Western music language, and such this chord will be found extensively in these compositions. Besides adding note techniques, there's one more approach in the harmonic aspect of combining these two musical languages, which is the employment of polymodality or polytonalities. And in these compositions, the adoption of polymodality has three steps, from polytonality, Messiaen's polymodality, and Chenjigan's polymodality. So in fact, the polytonality first appeared in the early of 20th centuries, like the music work by composer Bartók and Barber. Especially for the polytonalities, scholars associate it with the compositional aesthetics of many French musicians in the first half of the 21st centuries. And Messiaen, as one of successor composers in French music, cannot be avoided inherent in its music character, but with a further development by integrating his own music language, the Messiaen specific mode. Since he thinks his mode have more musical affection and rich tone colors. So like his professor, Chenjigan approached these techniques for creating rich acoustic sounds in his compositions, but along with the Chinese pentatonic mode. Here's an example. In the key arrangement, the vertically left several key systems coexist in the same tempo, the same measures. For example, in the major 88, it contains three keys, like A flat, D flat, E gong system, carried by the flute, violin, and cello sections, respectively. While in the horizontal directions, each voice also has its own independent key arrangements. The progression of the key in each voice accompanied by the phrase movement. For example, in the viola sections, even though each music fragment or phrase consists by four notes, it has sufficient elements to building a typical Chinese pentatonic system. Like in the major 88 and 89, the B flat, the second circle with the blue colors, the B flat, D flat, and F natural, E flat, they can build a D flat gong system with a missing A flat. Also, the A flat can be borrowed from other voice. This approach of harmonic design by different orientations made the key of this area under a blur environment. And I think this is the sound effect that composers want to create to reflect an uncertain inner world. So the pentatonic system with a fantasy feeling of French music character, such example also be found in the other part of its compositions. And this is also a specific way by Chenjigan in combining these two music languages. And the last aspect that Chenjigan learned from Messiaen is the approach to the orchestrations. Since each instrument has its own pitch range and timbre quality, so different arrangement and instrumentations can bring different acoustic effect. Here's one example from explanations. Since the music is approaching the end of first sections, it will be embraced the climax point of emotion release. So in order to achieve this smooth status, Chen Jigang used a rich orchestration arrangement to reflect the progression of mood changing. So example from measure 230 to 44. Almost all parts of the orchestra build together to create the tension musical character by a rich texture, which can be divided in 4 layers. The main melody is given to the solo violin in the bottom. The woodwind section is an equal layer for the main melodies, and the string section is responsible for the background and finishing for the music layer, and the percussion, harp, and the bass part are the decoration and filling the gap of the musical layer. So all these specific timbre contribute a musical world like a multi-picture canvas. So in a conclusions, in the harmonic aspect of larger forms, from pitch class to the harmonic arrangement, even the orchestration arrangement, we can see the shadow of the Messiaen's music character, and beyond that, composer Chen Jigang is seeking a way to keep the balance of Chinese music elements and Western music character in his work. And also, this trait can be applied in the form aspect of his compositions. Here, we need to move in the form aspect. This analysis will include 3 parts: the general progression, the general form constructions, the inner musical phrase arrangement, and notes group. So in the form aspect of larger subforms, the most salient character is extensively applying adoption of the triple concept. Chen Jigang applied the triple structure throughout composition, from new cluster to the general form. Since this composition is derived from a Guqi music, so called Yangguan Sandie. So Yangguan is the theme, the topic, and Sandie, San means the triple, means 3. Die means the stanza or sections, which means the main melodies need to be sung or played in 3 times, with a soft change or variation at the end of each sections. So which are very similar to the variation and ternary form in the Western music systems. So in manifestations, the criterion for dividing its music is based on the original main themes materials and its variation section, if not be complete short of. In the section 1, the first and the second thematic materials are mainly interpreted by the solo violin and cello section. In the second section, clarinet replaces the role of cello and reinterpret the first and second theme with the solo violin. And the third section is by the trumpet and the solo violins. Since the first section have completely shown the similar music structure design, so I will just mainly focus on this section for my illustrations. Also, in the inner structure of the first sections, so we can think each part could be divided in 3 stages. So the inner structure of the first sections, the same materials can be developed or alliterated in 3 processes. Before we go into analysis the inner structure, let's have a brief introduction. Introduce these two original music themes materials from Yangguan Sandie. And the first one is the happiness motif. And these themes applied in the violin. It should be this way. And the second one is the sadness or suffering motif from Yangguan Sandie. So the happiness motif be present in stable ascending contour. Each note is arranged in conjunction motions, seizing the sceneries of the poem as described is in a vigorous and hopeful circumstance, like a dawn at the green willow and the mist, while the sadness or suffering motif is a portrait of sad mood. The music arrangement being a dot rhythm with a detour like for a rising shape to imitate the third status. So I will use the progression of the happiness theme materials as my interpretations. The music materials in the drum forms be in a straight-out manner without using the original rhythms. The first line, for example. And the second stage of the theme evolution is play the cellos, which build on the original music materials, but with a further extension by 3 consecutive descending sequences, which continually to create a sad or sorrowful musical characters. And in the last stage, stage 3, the musical themes return in the solo violin section, but also feature a 3-part progression, will maintain the similar music character as cello section before. So in the third stage, from measures 36 to 38, which is a complete theme material presentation, follows by a harmonic note in the high music restoration, like the F and the C natural. So it is a imitation of the Guqin instrument. The latter two extension on consequence phrase seem to a connection or preparation for the sadness of separate music themes. Then after the complete 3 iterations, music arrived its final materials of in the major 54 one, the Sapphire's motif. The outcome of this process is the music can be understand the music theme maintains its basic characters to some extent, but also come with the composer's own interpretations, which result in a rebirth of the original music. And this is one of the form designed in its composition. And also the rhythmic pattern and note arrangements also adopt these triple designs. Here are two examples from the first section. In examples, besides the typical triplet 3+3 structure in the rhythmic patterns, the more obviously designed is the 3-note cluster. The motivated cell is designed to settle down in a fast 3-note cluster by ascending control. Also, let's one another example. So, beside the three-note cell marked in red colors, we can see an irregular rhythmic arrangement, especially from 168 to 169. The musical phrase start from an offbeat by the 8th note and 16th note rest, and by adding the quintuplet 3+2 design, make the music more flow and more momentum. What's more, the different articulation by the different performance methods, it blurs the feeling of normal rhythm feelings. The offbeat rhythmic pattern, the irregular rest, and all these efforts make the rhythm in this excerpt is very flexible. And this shade can be found from the Messiaen's idea in the rhythmic aspect. Messiaen believed that a rhythm in music should be based primarily on free and irregular natural rhythm and movement. So even in the later of these sections, music would meet a longer but a freer phrase as combine the more irregular note group structure. So in examples, the music will be arranged in free rhythmic patterns, the registration getting expanded gradually by two opposite directions. And meanwhile, the texture is getting intense by the 8 and those groups, and then accompanied by the gradually stronger dynamic and the fast tempo. So all these efforts make the music a vivid character, and just as described by Chen Zhigang himself, for this section is the thrills by illusions. After we have to talk about the harmonic and formal aspect of this composition, there's one last point need to be mentioned, which is how the musical theme presented in this music. And as we have mentioned the happiness and sadness suffering theme before, so we know these two materials come from different parts of the music. But composer Chen Zhigang makes these two motifs in one musical phrase, which I think it maybe have some enough meanings to embody the theme of the composition, like the sadness, happiness, literally come from all in one origin. Here's one example. The green marking shows the happiness materials with its variations. And the blue colors is the sadness or suffering motif. Now please look at the second phrase. Chen Zhigang combines the two motifs without any feeling of conflict, and which is a way to review the themes of music they come from one unities. Here's also another example in the key arrangement to reflect the two contract status of composing in a word. One is stable and one is melodies. So the oboe and the trumpet are responsible for starting a main thematic materials in which the key arrangement is very unstable movement by a semi or whole tone, like A flat to A natural and B natural. But in contrast, the key in the viola sections is just different. From A flat, shift the E gong system and from C to gong. These two contracts is two totally different key arrangements. And by these two voice layers, they represent two music characters, like the contradictory inner word of composer, the separation, and with the madness. Now we may have the general impression of Chen Qigong's music character and his compositions by the harmonic, the form analysis. In next sections, I will move into musicology aspect to find out the factor that influenced the change in the music character, which including the social influence, composer experience, and the preference, to help audience and the students have better understanding of this composition. And also these factors either applied in other Chinese contemporary music composer and the repertoire as the same generation of the Chen Qigongs. So firstly, from a global factor, as a part of the world culture, music and its development cannot be avoided being influenced by society change. And there's one term that refers to the character of change in our world today, is the multicultural, which is the often used descriptive term to characterize the fact of diversity in the society. And this word has appeared in 1920s as a result of globalizations. So under the rapid development in economy and other aspects of the contemporary society, the connection among countries became increasingly intense and frequently. At the same time, the difference in diversity from different areas, so they just get more familiar with each other, which exchange influenced the music style by the way of fusion and hybridizations. As one says, crossing and hybridizations was taking place not just within the Western music, but also between the Western and non-Western old tradition. People on all continents became more familiar with each other's music, and this broad category, which often blends the local scene, the style, instrument, scale, and other elements, and this work and the larger industrial forms is one of example of this fusion work. Accompanied by the word and back to the domestic environment, the modernization of Chinese musicians in the early 20th centuries was handled in blank sheet of papers. Since the turbulent periods in China's Chinese music doesn't have time and effort to develop itself. So while the music in Western world was in the late Romantic period. Another factor is the political situation in China. Music competitions has had a very close relationship with policy, especially before the policy of the reform opened up in 1978. So we can take the Butterfly Lover Concerto and the Yellow River Concertos as the illustrations. All written for the political propagandas and the Mao Zedong political stance and attitudes. But the situations changed after 1978. The modernization in Chinese traditional music embraced its rapid growth period because the policy of reform openness. China opens the door to the world and placed itself on the international stage, which has less restriction in the social life and rapidly growth in the economies. So China possesses living a more relaxed, the freer social environment, and was encouraged to engage in more social activities. So, and there is a chant called the common writing to personal writings. So common writings under Chinese environment means the music theme is under a specific purpose, especially the political propagandas. While the personality's writing is free of theme restrictions, composer can use any theme resource and he or she prefer. Also, in his compositions. Besides the common writing to personal writing, there's other two tendencies in the modern Chinese compositions. Secondly, is the further exploration in Chinese traditional music language. Besides for the second point, further expression in the traditional music language, composers are seeking more language in the Chinese language materials. Like maybe the factor would be history side, marking. They're just not limited to local like song or folk musics. And lastly, imitations transform to the combinations. So modern Chinese music development in the early 20th centuries, compositions were built on exceeding local tune and were designed to imitate acoustic sound of Chinese instruments or Chinese melodies. So the techniques from the Western music language were placed as subordinate positions to serve the main melodies. But the situation also is getting changed. As the Chinese and Western traditional and the techniques merge in China, the audience may probably hard to define the music character like heard, because music composition contains various music language and be presented in a independent character. So in our conclusions, this dissertation takes Chen Qigang's larger forms as a research object. By the systematic analysis work from the harmony and the form aspect, orchestration preference, to provide a brief knowledge of this composition to public. First of all, creative concept and the composition techniques are inseparable unities. Only the perfect combination of these two aspects can reflect the high state and the fine level of composition abilities. So we can see these compositions, we can hear the pentatonic scale, we can hear the French flavored techniques in these compositions. And from a broader perspective, music all over the world is merging into one mainstream called world music. So music both keeping its specific character and integrating with each other. So we need to keep in mind that globalization in music is a process of coexisting of unity and diversity. The development of music culture in the world will not pass a balanced situation all the times. Since each music genre has its own characteristics, the younger Chinese composers need to keep optimistic attitudes and inclusive attitude in the music compositions because they often each other. Also, not only the fusion between China and Western music, any progression of observation, digestion, and rebirth made with reference to foreign music culture is a very long and complex process, which needs time for the practicing and the testing. So we need, should keep an optimistic attitude to this process and be more patient. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Appreciate it.